Joining us this evening from England is Toни Ben, who served as a member of the British House of Commons for 50 years, retiring in 2001. And this past Sunday, he was in Iraq interviewing Saddam Hussein. Mr. Ben, thanks for being with us.
Right.
What led to this interview, and why did you sit down with the Iraqi leader?
Well, I saw Saddam Hussein in 1990. I had 3 hours with him then, just before the Gulf War, and I persuaded him to release all the British hostages. And then last September, when President Bush made it clear he wanted a war, I wrote and said, could I have another meeting, this time on television? And I heard nothing for months. And then Tariq Aziz, the Deputy Prime Minister, rang me up about 10 days ago and said, yes, he'll see you. So I went over with one purpose only, to explore the possibilities of a peaceful settlement of a war which otherwise will cause immense suffering to innocent people, possibly set the Middle East aflame, and embitter the relations between Christians and Muslims, perhaps for hundreds of years, as the Crusades did.
Where did the interview take place?
I met him in his presidential palace.
In what part of Iraq?
Well, in Iraq, somewhere in Iraq. I don't know where it was. You know, I haven't got a map of Baghdad in Baghdad, of course.
And how many other people were with you when you conducted this interview?
There were 2 interpreters, one translating into English and one into Arabic. Tariq Aziz, the Deputy Prime Minister, and 1 or 2 other people.
And who recorded the interview?
It was recorded by his own cameraman. I wasn't prepared to take a camera unit with me in case turned out that they were part of a CIA assassination squad. And he recorded it, and then he handed the film over, and I brought the film back on Monday.
We should point out that you're in an audience with a number of college students in York, England. What are you telling them tonight?
Well, I've been talking about my visit, about the issues, about the danger of war, about the role of the United Nations, and so on. I've just been talking, as I have been all over the country for years now. I've been talking. I've been this university a few years ago. Yeah.
What are your impressions as you sit down face-to-face, the first interview with Saddam Hussein in 12 years before a television camera? Your impressions of him, and was he telling the truth?
Well, I think on the question of the weapons of mass destruction, I cannot say, but I don't necessarily believe Colin Powell either. I'll tell you why. Do you remember at the time of the Kuwait War, we were told tremendous stories that Iraqi soldiers had taken babies from incubators in Kuwait, thrown them away, and taken the incubators back. It was an absolute lie. It was invented by a public relations company in New York, paid for by the Sheikh of Kuwait. Give another example. In 1998, Clinton bombed a factory in the Sudan, saying it was chemical weapons. It was an absolute lie. It was a medical pharmaceutical factory authorized by the UN. So, you know the old saying, truth is the first casualty in war. So I don't know who to believe. The only people I would believe are the inspectors. And Hans Blix and Marieda have said they've no evidence themselves. Now, on the question of Al-Qaeda, I do believe him. He said he had nothing to do with them because, of course, there's a bitter hostility between his philosophy and the philosophy of fundamentalist Muslims. I tell you who knows more about Al-Qaeda than anybody else in the world, and that is Washington, because Osama bin Laden was funded by the Americans and sent as a terrorist into Afghanistan to get the Russians out. So that's my impression of the truth of what he said.
Mr. Ben, you were in Baghdad on Sunday. You came back to London on Monday. How did it end up on British television Tuesday evening? What was involved in getting it on the air for the British audience?
Well, I said I would not accept that it should be cut. It had to be uncut, which was to prevent them picking out one moment when he frowned and just showing that. So the whole thing was broadcast, half an hour. And then there was a discussion with me afterwards, rather like the one I'm having with you.
And then it aired on CBS last night. It will air in its entirety on C-SPAN tonight. What do you want the American audience to take away from this interview?
Well, I think we should all think it out for ourselves, the consequences of war. I mean, you know, it's not just the innocent Iraqi people who'll be killed, the consequence of the Middle East, the long-term consequence. And in the world in which we live, where, you know, weapons are distributed all over the place, there's no hope but justice, internationalism, democracy, and peace. That's what I believe in, because I'm of an age when I remember the Charter of the UN. Lost a brother in the war, lived in London in the Blitz. Lots of my comrades and friends were killed in the armed forces. I was a pilot, and I don't want to see that again. And I think if the Charter of the UN is torn up, and President Bush and Mr. Blair both said they will not accept a veto by the UN, I think that could be signing the death warrant of the human race.
What do you think will happen?
Oh, don't ask me to forecast the future. You're paid to do that. I'm paid to, well, I'm not paid, but I do it to influence the future. I'm trying to persuade people. I can't forecast. You're better qualified than me. I don't know what Bush is going to do.
Tony Benn, who served as a member of the British House of Commons from 1950 until 2001, served in 2 Labour government cabinets. Mr. Benn is joining us from York, England. Sir, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, well, goodbye. Say, shout something back, lads. Right.
From the students in York, England.
Joining me here in the studio is the former Labour MP, Tony Ben. Mr. Benn, the Foreign Secretary, Margaret Beckett, saying today that Sadamu Hussein has now been held to account. Yes. Do you agree? He's been held to account?
500,000 Iraqi children died because of the sanctions. That was UNICEF. 665,000 Iraqis have died since America and Britain invaded. One more death will solve no problem. And the really important thing is where we move to. And the Americans who voted against Bush recognized the war is unwinnable. Saddam was a brutal dictator, but also a very close ally of the United States. They armed him to go into Iran. They supported him. And I don't think that an execution solves anything.
Do you think he had a fair trial?
No, it should have been an international trial. But the Americans, as you probably know, don't accept the International Criminal Court. If a single American soldier was ever arrested and put on trial, the American army would go in and release him. And I think it's the hypocrisy of it, really, because he had no weapons of mass destruction. He had nothing to do with 9/11, which pretended he had. And we were lied to, and that was what led to the war. And you see, take the execution. Supposing in South Africa, Nelson Mandela had insisted that Vorster and the white leaders were hanged, there would have been an endless succession of bloodshed. And he didn't. He said truth and reconciliation. And that is the right way forward. There will be no peace in Iraq until the American and British forces withdraw. That is the one hope for the future. And another death will solve nothing.
Do you fear this execution will heighten the violence? I mean, we already have extraordinary violence there on a daily basis, scores of people dying every day. But do you think that could get even worse?
Well, December was the worst month, I think, of American casualties. The war and killing will go on until American and British forces withdraw. It's as simple as that. And the American voters saw that when they voted against Bush themselves.
Are you surprised the speed with which this execution was carried out? Because it is the religious festival of Eid. There, a lot of people were thinking it might be not carried out for several days.
It was a political execution. I mean, when he was captured, Bush said he should be executed before there was even a trial. So I think you have to see it in that context. And it will not solve a single problem.
And yes, you say it won't solve a single problem, but a dictator who is responsible for thousands of deaths has to be punished, surely.
Does he? What about General Pinochet? The CIA sent him into Chile. He killed thousands of his opponents. And who was his best friend? Mrs. Thatcher. So be logical about it.
Are you suggesting that he shouldn't have been punished once he was in Iraqi government hands?
I think if there was to be a trial, it should have been an international criminal court. But you see, Desmond Tutu's Truth and Reconciliation has got a much better answer than finding one man, put him on trial and hang him. That doesn't solve any problems. I used to be in favor of war crimes tribunals, and I remember the Nuremberg trial. I heard the verdicts on the radio. But now it's not the answer. You've got to go forward. And it's very interesting to me that Gandhi, Mandela and Tutu, none of them Westerners, are the people who give the best moral guidance to the nation and the world today.
You were against the war in Iraq, of course, but now Saddam is gone, rightly or wrongly. What do you think should be Britain's position?
Withdraw from Iraq.
Straight away?
Absolutely. And 90% of the Iraqis say that themselves. I mean, there's no question about that is the right thing to do, and we should be focusing now on the answer to the problem, not killing another person and saying that will be an advance to democracy.
You don't think an immediate withdrawal would just make things worse?
No, I do not. I think that the bloodshed in the last 3.5 years, the Iraq wars lasted almost as long as the First World War. Thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands have died, and no progress has been made. And that's because the motive for the war, Bush wanted the oil, Had nothing to do with weapons, nothing to do with 9/11. And Blair did what he was told. I mean, Blair has simply obeyed orders from Bush. And the legacy of Bush and Blair will be the killings at Iraq. That's the only thing ever remembered for history. And Saddam will be remembered as a dictator, which is what he was, and an ally of the United States of America.
Okay, Tony Benn, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you for joining us.